Good afternoon and welcome to CEC Gurukul lecture. In today's session, we have a series beginning on symbolic expression. I have with me my colleague Ms. Manisha Sharma. She is going to explain the lecture in symbolic language, in sign language. So let's start with this series on introduction to sociology. We are going to talk about basic sociology. What is the discipline of sociology? How the discipline emerged, and then we will discuss about what sociologists do, what are the basic concepts that they kind of study or they help us understand around in society. So to start, what is sociology? When we try to understand the discipline of sociology, the first thing that comes to our mind is that sociology is the systematic study of society. What does this mean? This means that we are trying to understand the world around us. So there is a common sense understanding, commonly held beliefs. But as sociologists, we interpret the hidden meaning behind human action. So sociology is concerned with describing and explaining the pattern of inequality, deprivation, and conflict. Now, when we say it explains deprivation or inequality, it implies that society, the interaction, social action is based on stratifications, hierarchical relations, and these relations are caste, class, gender. Now, the resources are limited, and therefore the hierarchy help us to distribute or redistribute the resources according to the status or role assigned to individual. This is what is the discipline of sociology. So we are trying to say that sociology helps us to understand our own life, the life in which we are living. It helps so by explaining relationship between personal experience, external events, and between self and society. So we have a very important concept in sociology given by C. Wright Mills, and that is sociological imagination. Now, what is sociological imagination? The sociological imagination, as explained by C. Wright Mills, is the relationship between the self and the society. And in his work, he uses the term personal trouble. Personal trouble is the sense that as individual in society, we have some problems which we are facing. Say as an individual, I don't have a job, so I am unemployed. Because I'm unemployed, I'm not able to meet the basic necessity. So that is my personal problem. Now, how do a sociologist make sense of it? Sociologist will try to connect that individual problem to the larger society. That is how we are going to imagine that why am I unemployed? I am unemployed because there is some problem with the economy, with the state, or in terms of a disbalance between the demand and supply of job. So this is the relation between the personal trouble and the social milieu. So personal and the public is not disconnected. They are related. So we are going to talk about how you need to develop a sociological imagination. And how do a sociologist do it? They do it by trying to grapple the social context in which an issue or a problem is initiated. This helps us to beautifully describe the discipline of sociology. So we are trying to connect biography. And what is a biography? A biography is an individual's personal life, or what characteristics you have, what kind of attributes you have, what kind of skills you have. So that biography or the type of a person one is dependent on the context in which one is growing up. So if I am growing up, say, in a rural area under economic stress, I will have some kind of attributes lacking in me. So I'll not be, say, very competent with computer or very computer IT because those resources are not available. So the biography and the social context are not to look separate. They are connected, and that is helping us to understand society, the personal and the public axis in terms of developing an imagination. So this is what is the discipline of sociology. Now we know what sociologists are doing. The next question is, how did the discipline emerge? In compared to other social sciences, sociology is a very recent or a young discipline, because it emerged at the time of Industrial Revolution in the early 19th century. So the 3 or 4 revolutions which paved the way for the development of the discipline. So French Revolution, Industrial Revolution and Enlightenment. Now what did these 3 things do? They brought about a change in the socio-economic structure of the society, and it is within this upheaval or imbalance which is created in the society, or we can say in a very simple word, social change happened. The discipline of sociology emerged. So when we look into these 3 revolutions, we see it helped us to kind of develop sociological imagination. Because what did we learn? We learned that as an individual personal problem has to be connected to the context in which it is emerging. So if we look into the society and say individualism is growing, we are moving away from religion to science. Now how did this happen? This happened because of enlightenment. This happened because of Industrial Revolution. So it encouraged the evidence to substantiate theories. And when we look into how human action started changing, we have this 18th century democratic revolution encouraging the view that human action can change society. So we look into these revolutions and try to connect, and we'll see how the discipline evolved. So the Industrial Revolution, and I'm sure we are familiar with, the Industrial Revolution was a change in the modes of production from domestic modes of production. We were moving to machine modes of productions. Industries were set up. So that led to large number of connected changes. It led to shift of population from rural areas to industrial area. It led to a kind of a shift from a community-based subsistence consumption to market-based consumptions. So we can see that Industrial Revolution led to economic growth. It led to advancement of technology. But then at the same time, it created poverty because it led to class formation, and there were large number of other problems connected to Industrial Revolution. And that is why we are kind of considering this as the base from where the discipline will emerge. Problems were created and there was a need to find out solution. And in order to substantiate the understanding of these social problems that society was facing, what was thought of is a scientific method to study society. And we'll see in the course of the lecture how Auguste Comte, who is considered as father of sociology, invents this term sociology as a science of study, a scientific study of society. So we find how these revolution led to a conviction that we as individual need to find out a method to grapple the problem. So if there was a problem of unemployment because of a shift from agrarian to industrial, and the industry could not absorb all, so unemployment was created. Now what did we want to know? How much of unemployment is created? So we needed a method. And what was the method? The method was social survey. We do a survey of unemployment and then study the problem of unemployment. So the effort was towards development of a scientific way in which social issues could be studied. And this in basically can be termed as positivism. So the Auguste Comte, Emile Durkheim, Herbert Spencer, not Max Weber, Karl Marx, most of the so-called founding figures in sociology, or those who were behind the emergence of the discipline, were kind of putting forward this argument that society could be studied in a scientific method. Now we cannot in the limited time talk about all the theories, but we will briefly discuss the historical development. And here the 3 or 4 figure, or we can go on adding names, are important in the development of discipline. Number 1 is Auguste Comte, number 2 is Herbert Spencer, third Emile Durkheim, we can talk about Karl Marx, and then the most important contribution in the development of sociology, which will take it a little wider from positivist school to interpretative school, is Max Weber. So let's start with the first father of sociology, that is Auguste Comte. Now Auguste Comte, as I already said, coined the term in 1838. And what was the term coined? The term was socius, which is the meaning is social, and the Greek word logos, which means reasoning. So when we combine socius with logos, it leads to the concept of sociology. And therefore, meaning of sociology is reasoning about the social, reasoning, thinking, critically looking at a social issue. And we keep in mind the concept of sociological imagination. We are just not thinking about it. We are not only understanding the meaning. The attempt is to connect the individual with the wider society. So that is how Auguste Comte was in favor of a science of society. He argued that social world could be studied in the same scientific method like natural world. So you know, also because there is a lot of kind of background coming in from physical sciences, so the desire was to develop a discipline that would do exactly the same thing. The only difference was that the physical science was studying fauna, flora, animals world, and social sciences, and especially sociology, would study human relations, would study social action, and that could be done in a scientific method. So sociology was a science based on observation, classification, and comparison of social reality. We read these work of Auguste Comte, Durkheim, Spencer, we will see that the comparative method was the most important method for studying society. How did they do this? They kind of did a survey of 2 different societies, compared the 2 societies, and came out with certain generalization. So that was the science of society. When we look into Auguste Comte and we see what was his trying to kind of arrive at, he was looking into the science which could help us to predict. Predict? Why did we need to predict? Because the problem was there. Sociologists were trying to figure out a problem. Once the problem was understood, they needed to predict the course of time over which the problem would be solved. And therefore, prediction was a method for social control. So sociology as a discipline was basically trying to discover laws of social order, and the core idea behind Auguste Comte was stability, or we can say status quo. He wanted society to come back. So we know that Industrial Revolution had kind of shaken society. It was under upheaval. These philosophers were trying to figure out how we could have certain laws where society could come back to equilibrium. And therefore, he divided the subject matter into dynamic and static. The dynamic, as the term itself says, deals with social structure and the changes which are taking place. Now, when change takes place, it would lead to conflict, and when conflict happens within the social structure, it leads to disrupted social order. So, we can give an example of the institution of family. It has a structure. Now, when there are differences, and this could also happen because of industrialization, people became more individualistic. So, they wanted to move away from community collective order to individualist order. So, what happened? Because of the change in the structure, property disputes took place. Brothers and sisters, they wanted to have their own share of property. So, with this disruption, the social order underwent changes. There were a lot of conflict, court cases, to the extent of even murders and other negative conflicts. So, that is how we try to understand the dynamic nature of social system. Most important when we talk about Comte is the three historical stages that he suggests, and these are theological, metaphysical and positive. Now, if you look into the term theological, it means supernatural. Theologicals are people who believes on some great power which is going to bring about order, and that's the reliance is on order. So, when we look into the primitive states, the structure was more theological oriented. As society started developing tools, techniques, there was a shift from theology to metaphysical. And what is metaphysical? Then it was kind of change was attributed to some metaphysical change. Metaphysical means abstract change, things which we can't see, things we cannot observe. So, it was kind of some principle which in the Australian tribe Durkheim uses the term mana which would kind of bring about change. And as society moves towards enlightenment, reformation, with the separation of religion from politics, separation of the church from the state, reasoning, scientific thinking starts, and this stage he defines as positive. So, people start understanding reality with help of science. Every action has a reasoning, every action needs a scientific explanation. This is how Auguste Comte explains social change. The next thinker is Herbert Spencer. Now, Herbert Spencer was a British scholar and he is known for his evolutionary theory. Evolutionary theory in the sense that he is trying to say that as change is taking place, social structure evolves. There is a change in the structure itself, and he applied Darwin's theory of evolution. So, even Herbert Spencer, like Comte, was thinking of a science of society. So, he says that just as organism body develops, evolves, society evolves from primitive to industrial, and it is known as organic analogy or evolution, Darwin evolution of Herbert Spencer. So, evolution begins at the inorganic stage, goes through the organic or living worlds of plants and animals, and ends in the human and social world of men. Spencer believed that all phenomena, organic, inorganic, superorganic, follow the same law of evolution. And that is why for Spencer, sociology was science. You could, just as you could study the evolution of organic fauna, flora, you could understand society's evolution. So, his most important work was social study, the study of sociology, principle of sociology, and man versus the state. So, he is into the same school of positivist approach who were arguing for sociology as a science of society. Now, the next thinker, and which is very important, is Emile Durkheim. Now, Emile Durkheim was writing in early 20th century, and he is kind of also gives a very important contribution in terms of understanding methods, religion, collectivity, and the most important study by Emile Durkheim is suicide, where he applies statistics to understand the nature of suicide. In 1895, Emile Durkheim published the Rules of Sociological Method. And if you look into the Rules of Sociological Method, it is basically giving out the methodology that social science should use to understand or study society. And Rules of Sociological Method is kind of concerned with the problems, So, physical science was studying organic life. Social science started studying. So, obviously, you had to have a method through which you could study. And in his other book, Division of Labor, he will talk about shift from mechanical solidarity to organic solidarity. In his work, The Elementary Forms of Religious Life, Durkheim will help us to understand the collectivity, how social solidarity is maintained through religion. Religion helps us to understand society or social reality. In this work, he says society is God. So, he will kind of help us to understand the significance of collective over individual reality. Then we have Weber. Now, Weber becomes very important because Weber moves from Durkheim and Auguste Comte to a subjective understanding of sociology, and with him starts the school of Verstehen or interpretative action. For Weber, every action had a meaning, and you had to interpret that meaning in order to understand society. So, the task before sociologists is to observe the inner meaning and help us understand society. So, for Weber, sociology was not a pure science. It was more to do with how you could make sense of reality. And that is how in his work, The Protestant Ethic and Capitalism, he says how religion helps us understand the rise of capitalism. So, we see in this lecture, try to understand what is sociology, how sociology developed, and the prominent figures which helped in the development of discipline, specifically as a science of the society. With this, I come to an end of this lecture. Thank you.